Welcome to RegNet, your source of news, views, and knowledge on all things risk and regulation. In today's episode, we will be covering diversity and inclusion in the financial sector. My name is Waleed, and I'm joined with Isaac. Isaac, how are you?
I'm very well. Good to be here and chatting to you about diversity and inclusion.
All right, so with that, let's dive into diversity and inclusion in the financial sector, which was a recent discussion paper that the FCA launched. It's probably worth starting with what is meant by diversity and inclusion. Do you want to take it, Isaac?
Yeah, that's fine. So what we've got here is the two definitions that we pulled out from the discussion paper. I think overall, although we have definitions here, the paper comes across as being very pragmatic and very open-minded about the means to achieve a very clear objective, about which I think there is little disagreement. Diversity, and there is an interesting discussion about the difference between diversity and inclusion, and we found that it was helpful to get that distinction clearly outlined right at the beginning of the paper between diversity, which is as the word says, the range of peoples you bring into the company, the diversity, and inclusion, which is about how they are involved in decision making and in the business. You could have diversity but not inclusion, and you could have inclusion but not diversity. And obviously, neither of those two outcomes are ideal. You want both diversity and inclusion. Waleed, any thoughts on that?
So the way I'm simplifying this in my mind is diversity is who you let into the door, into your business. And you need to have a mixed group there. And inclusion is having let them in. How do you give them equal footing so they are not afraid to sort of vocalize their thoughts or views or opinions on the business? The only thing I'd add is that when we talk about diversity, the FCA is considering diversity when it comes to the products, the workforce, and the decision makers, so the board. So it's not just really in around about your workforce, but it's a bit wider than that.
Yeah, that's a good distinction, and the PRA is obviously thinking much more about the boards and the workforce, and they're really talking about group thinking. So yeah,
perfect. So it's probably worth covering why now. Why are they talking about this now? Is it because they've got some time to write some thought papers? Not busy enough?
You should know, Waleed, you were there.
No comment.
No need of answering the question.
Yeah.
Right. So do you want to talk about this, Waleed, and a little bit about why it is good for business?
Yeah. So, a lot of it's just repeating what we've already mentioned, but I think it's to minimize groupthink or often survivor's bias. So it happened last time, we were okay by luck. Doesn't mean that you'll be okay next time. So it's about adding diversity to the perspective at the decision-making part and across the business. So you've got people, not everyone's looking in one direction, you've got people looking in different directions. And it's really to, in my opinion, I think there's a lot of focus in the discussion paper on the conduct outcome, which has always been there, but it's more prevailing now because of the coronavirus, because that itself has shifted a lot of base case conditions for a lot of customer profiles. So previously you might think, look, this is how this customer profile operates, but how does this customer profile operates in post-COVID, for instance? I think the other thing probably to keep an eye on, especially for financial products, is how the changing interest rate environment, which might change quite drastically in quite a short time, have an impact on this particular customer profiles. And I guess from a regulation perspective, there's some parliamentary objectives on diversity. But I think the one thing where it does add some anchoring is the social aspect of ESG. Because now you have a central regulated body that's starting to say, look, this is what I'm expecting to see on the social aspect of it. Right now, you've got every asset manager coming up with their own methodology. Hopefully, this will start baselining them.
Good point. Yeah.
I guess that's the why now. Anything else to add, Isaac?
No, I think the one thing I found interesting about the paper is that both the PRA and the FCA came across as being pretty comfortable that they were acting within their own objectives. So there was no question is it something that we should not be doing? And they were clear that it was just something that perhaps they haven't got round in the fullness of time, but this was the time. So I think with that, you can expect them to push this quite seriously.
There's kids in the back. And I think that they're using parliamentary objectives as a hook to push this out.
Yeah.
And then on to the next one's problem. It's probably worth looking at how the sausage is made. So Isaac, do you want to talk us through the slide?
Okay, right. So we've got the first discussion paper, the discussion paper now, which is open for consultation until the 30th of September. We've seen already one of the consultation papers mooted in the paper, which is the one about the listing rules. And that's obviously coming from the FCA and dealing with a very explicit part of the financial landscape. And then we're told that there will be another consultation paper, but perhaps addressing the needs and how these objectives are met in respect of financial services business, which will come in Q1 2022. The words around who will, whether this will be one paper or two, suggested to us that it will be one paper from the PRA and the FCA, which I think we will all agree that it's good news, because it means that there is a joined up approach throughout, and it's perhaps a step forward from what we've seen before around operational resilience.
And less documents to read. I think the only thing sort of worth playing, sort of highlighting on this slide is the process is you have a discussion paper, which then closes and they launch a consultation paper. So discussion paper is here's what we're thinking. Consultation paper is this is what the new rules are going to be. And then the policy statements are here are the new rules, so to speak. I found it a bit odd when I saw a consultation paper on listing rules discussing the same concept that are sort of flagged in the discussion paper, but the discussion paper is still open for feedback. So that's probably very small subset of listing rules of the larger FCA handbook. But whatever you see here, this is almost like a lead indicator. Whatever you see here will most likely be informing the consultation paper and the final end state, because FCA has to make sure that there's no regulatory arbitrage. So you don't have something beneficial or detrimental in one set of rule books like listing rules versus others. So you'll see them start aligning. So this is if you are interested in this area, have a read through this and see what rule updates they're recommending, because that's a direction of travel for the wider discussion paper on diversity and inclusion. All right, cool. Let's look at the next slide. So expectations and outcome. So this probably, I guess in this slide, we just want to cover what's currently happening to help promote diversity. And it's not an easy task because it's quite interconnected. I think they use the term intersectionality. You come across this, Isaac, in the paper?
Yes, I did.
They talk about, yeah, I think that's a completely made up word, intersectionality, but it's about how different.
No, it exists. It exists.
All right, then good word. I'll remember that for Scrabble next time. So a couple of things that people are currently doing, and this is something that the regulators are doing as well, and I've seen some businesses do that, is name anonymized recruitment, which is when you're looking at a CV, they take out diversity information that may influence a decision one way or the other. There are some initiatives around career returns, specifically for women who've taken a maternity break and want to come back. There's a lot of data on diversity being collected by some firms. FC, I think, is very good at that. There's a concept of pool cohort that's currently PRA is running. And Isaac, tell us about what you make of this pool or cohort recruitment.
Well, I mean, what I make of what's in the discussion paper, obviously.
Yes, and general views as well, because I've got views on everything.
I think the idea, from what I've read in the paper, is that there are occasions when, rather than making individual appointments, they'll identify a number of senior appointments in particular that have to be made, and look at all of them in the round, so that the consideration of diversity and inclusion can apply in a more holistic way. So, which I think it's as usual with many of these concepts, it sounds really sensible. I guess the question is, does it work in practice? But I think, I mean, I can see that it makes sense to think that way. That's all I'd say. So yeah.
I love this concept, but I think it's going to be really hard to execute. So effectively, yeah. So you're expecting a bunch of head offs like CFO, CEO, and let's say head of HR all leaving. So rather than hiring individually those people, you look at 3 candidates as a collective and say, how would they operate as a team? So you're effectively hiring teams. For an established business, you have to wait a long time for the whole team to leave because often they leave one at a time. If they're all leaving, the regulator will say, guys, what's happening with the succession plan? Why is everyone on the top management leaving at the same time? But you can certainly do that at one level down, at the direct reports, where you could have, look, this guy works, this direct report of the CFO works really well with that, this direct report of the, I don't know, COO. Let's pair them together and then consider them as a cohort as they move up. But this quite nicely dovetails into the next point, which is talent pipeline and succession plan. You need to start thinking about those from a diversity perspective because this is not going to happen overnight. Mm-hmm. There's some sponsorship programs where you've got interns from various different demographics. It's quite old. I mean, not a new concept. There's a point around board compositions for dual firms. This is currently a live requirement. It's in SYSC 4.3 if you're interested. And then there was something on gender neutral remuneration that was pushed out in December last year. So effectively, there's a lot of focus on what the PRA called the visible diversity, so gender, color, age, but not a lot of focus on the invisible one, like which school you went to, what's your socioeconomic background, and so forth. I think there was one other example here. Sexual orientation is another one, which is a non-visible one. I guess that's all I wanted to say on the current expectations. The reason for really discussing them was to highlight that it's not like we're starting from square one. There are some steps that have been taken, and the paper is now really looking to say, okay, based on where we are today, where do we take it forward to? Yeah. And then sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say that to your point, Waleed, that one of the things that strikes me about this discussion paper is how much there was of current initiatives that are happening to enhance diversity in financial services business. There's a box with a long list of initiatives that are happening, and the thrust of the paper is along the lines of not saying that that's not good enough, because it is good, but it's about saying it's not enough, we need more.
Yeah. Cool. And then the outcomes that the regulator is looking to achieve, they all go on about customer outcome. Now, this is this can be aligned to the regulatory objectives. So their objective are customer outcome. That's why they keep banging on about good customer outcome. From a PRA perspective, they talk about better risk management. Ultimately, their aim is for a stable financial system. The more stable and inclusive financial system you have, the better PRA has done a job of executing their objectives. And then lastly, which is the secondary objective, is foster competition. And by having a more diverse team, you won't miss out new business opportunities because you weren't aware of a particular need for a particular customer segment, which your team isn't aware of because there isn't enough diversity. An example could be, I don't know, I'm thinking off the top of my head, but something along the lines of, I don't know, let's say loans for secondary school, for instance. So I've got a very bright kid. I want to send him to a private school. Is there a product there? There's a demand there, and so on. Completely random example, probably doesn't work, but hopefully it lands a point. And then one thing that I sort of fudged in there, which Isaac fought a little bit, was the support of the social of the ESG effort. Now, this is completely my interpretation that that's what they're looking to do. It may be that they're not looking to do that, but I think one of the happy coincidence, happy outcome of this would be that we'll start seeing some formal structure and expectations around the ESG that you can then build off of a regulatory framework.
Yes. Why will you not think that that's what they are doing?
They never explicitly mentioned that that's what they want to do. I think this is probably a happy coincidence.
Yeah. I mean, okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Where they're fixing the window to make sure the fox doesn't come into the house, but that also stops any other burglar coming in as well. They weren't thinking burglars; they were thinking foxes. That's sort of sort of a happy coincidence.
So it's a happy coincidence. The window is being fixed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and one of the consequences. Having said that, so if you take a step back, there are much wider consideration in tackling diversity and inclusion. Though the paper doesn't go on much about inclusion, they focus mainly on diversity, but there are wider considerations like immigration rules. So you can only have so much diversity. You can only have so much diversity. This is the insurance blood in me. You can only have so much. You can only have so much diversity from a particular region. I think there will be a requirement to flex the immigration rules to allow for a wider pool, and we're seeing that happening in the tech space, where the rules are being relaxed for hiring tech talent for some of the startup ecosystem within the UK, especially post-Brexit. Talk about the role of HR, Isaac.
Okay. So I suppose the role of HR talks a great deal about the role that the accountable executive will play in driving these objectives of diversity and inclusion. But I think, to my mind, while the executive will be the accountable for it, the body of people that will be responsible for delivering on the ground diversity and inclusion is likely to be HR. I mean, HR might have a diversity and inclusion team, obviously, to concentrate all the activity, but it's HR at the end of the day. So I think there is a I wouldn't call it a gap, but there is something a little bit that there is a little bit of a silence that makes me wonder where are they and what is the expectation. But I think that they are an integral part of the solution in terms of delivering this diversity and inclusion. And like with many other functions, like say risk management, is maybe the time when you've got to change a little bit, but change is good. And change allows you to do things that perhaps beforehand it was a little bit out of reach. But it can, again, if you can stretch and reach it to that can add a lot of value to the business, as we've been discussing so far with diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I think the discussion paper itself doesn't talk about who will do it. It especially does not reference HR as much as it should have. That's what we were discussing earlier as well. But I think this is a great opportunity for head of HR to step up and get involved with it. Because if you take a step back, there's no other place in the business where you can put this accountability other than HR. I'm gonna just have a quick chat around the conflict with the SMCR. Now, in the paper, they specifically mentioned, don't worry about the SMCR rules. Don't use them as an scapegoat that we can't do it because of the SMCR rules. But having said that, I think it will take time before people are ready to take these decision-making roles with the right level of experience. Because I don't think the regulator will say, oh, this guy off the road, yeah, get him on your board, no problem. He can join as an ed. I think they will still go through a couple of with the relevant due diligence. That's why I think rather than focusing on the top layer at this stage, it's really about focusing on one layer down. So direct report of these execs, which is where the HR can step up and start putting in the right training and development programs to make sure that by the time in a year, 2 years time, when they're looking to take up those positions, they will pass the SMCR tests. That's all I'm going to say on that point. Network effects is another one, which was quite interesting that Isaac, you mentioned.
Okay, so I thought that one of the other things that the paper doesn't mention, as much as perhaps I would have expected, is the fact that diversity and inclusion obviously has a very important aspect at the top, but that's built up from the bottom up. And when I think about building up that diversity and inclusion from the bottom up in a business, then the one hurdle that you might encounter with in the journey of building up that diversity and inclusion might be that although you're attracting people of different backgrounds, when it comes to then making them stay in the business and making them thrive in the business, it may be about the limited network effects that they have to grow within that business. And then putting perhaps a little bit of the emphasis in helping people build those networks that we all know that are needed to succeed in business might perhaps tip the balance and ensure that over time, you're building the right diversity and inclusion within the business. So that's a thought there. I don't know if you want to add anything, Waleed.
Yeah. So effectively, what you're saying is it's the so how can the business nurture the internal connections or internal conversations? Is it internal to the business and network you're talking about, or even outside the business, or both?
Yes, because that's really the kind of the focus. You want the people, you bring in people into the business and you want them to thrive in the business. So the network is first and foremost internal. Obviously, there's also something about external, but yeah, first things first.
Okay, so again, this is one of the other things that HR needs to consider as part of the training development, and maybe it's a third prong, which is networking, or how you facilitate. Maybe it's a mentorship program, or maybe some sort of.
There will be many ways of enhancing networks with a view to build up diversity and inclusion. I'm sure there isn't a single answer to that.
Perfect. So that's, I guess that leads into the demographic preferences, which the words on its own make no sense. But I think what we are trying to capture with that is there's certain demographics who are not aware of the roles that exist in regulated businesses. So insurance is a good example where no one goes to school thinking I'm going to become a broker, I'm going to become an underwriter. So if you don't tap into these demographics and say, look, there are roles available in the financial sector, and these are the roles. So this is an education piece. Maybe it's for the companies to do. Maybe it's at a wider level. Maybe it's a regulator that's encouraging university students or school students or A-level students to consider these roles in financial services. But going back to the network effect, I think it's also important. I guess the decisions you make for your career and where you want to end up also depend on the people around you when you're growing up. So if you've got someone who works for a bank, then you sort of want to emulate them and work in a bank or work in an insurance company. So going back to the network effect, there is an inside network effect that you can facilitate, but there is a wider outside network effect, which means that depending on who you're connected to, you're likely to land in a regulated role or not. And that will have an impact on diversity, which is outside the outside the role of the insurance company or the regulated firm. I think I'm waffling right now, so I'll stop here. But I think there's a networking effect inside a business, which HR can promote. And then there's a wider networking effect that funnels in talent to your business. And that wider networking effect, I think people just need to think about how they can facilitate that. And that's going to be a joint society level effort as opposed to just a firm specific effort. There are probably other considerations, but we won't dig that hole any deeper, I think.
Yeah.
In terms of next steps, Isaac, you want to take this?
Okay, let me start at least. I think it's clear looking at the paper, at the discussion paper, that in addition to consultations, there's going to be a pilot in the autumn about data collection. Data collection here has two kind of aspects. There is a specific data collection for the pilot in the autumn, where the PRA and the FCA will generate some templates that they expect to be populated. But I think the more important aspect of data collection is a collection that firms should start to do on an ongoing basis from now on, or to enhance from now on, because we know that many of them are already collecting data, with a view to understand the diversity and inclusion. And the paper is quite good in terms of highlighting the challenge, not the challenges, but the kind of data points that could be collected in the future. The best one I came across in the paper was the one about the life stages of employees. So how they are, people join the business, and then how they are promoted, and how they, at some point, they might leave. And being able to track that journey by reference to someone's diversity features, I think it could show a great deal of insights about how diversity and inclusion is happening in practice. Waleed, would you like to talk about the next one?
Yeah, just on the data piece, before you can solve any problem, you need to know what is going on. And that's what data collection is. And the only thing I'd say is, when you start thinking about what attributes you want to collect for diversity, it gets quite hard after the fifth one. So you can get age, gender, ethnicity, you can rattle off 4 or 5 of them, and after which you go, what else? So I guess if you're a smaller or medium firm, which probably won't be participating in the pilot in autumn because it's voluntary, you should definitely look at what data attributes the FCA is looking to collect, because eventually when this becomes rules, they will start collecting that more formally. So it's probably worth just having a peek to see what data is collecting. The next one was revisit target customer profiles by product. And it's something I mentioned earlier as well. And effectively what we're sort of trying to articulate that is, if you have customer personas in your business or profiles in your business for which you are developing products for, when you revisit them, just have a think about the diversity perspective for that. So when you say, look, I've got a 35-year-old living in central London with 2 kids buying this product, for instance, I guess you wanna add more data attributes to that profile by it's an I don't know, what do they call it? The person's an immigrant. They've come from a developing country. So you're starting to add some of these diversity considerations, and then say, look, does this product still fit their needs? I think this becomes more important with some of sort of key external changes coming. Coronavirus is one, rising interest rates another. I think climate change will be one. If I was at the PRA, I would start reflecting climate change in customer profiles, i.e. this person lives near a flood region, and he's look at the diversity and then consider what impact it may have on it. And I guess the last point is just start exploring your diversity strategy and who in the business will be accountable. So we feel it's the HR. I think it's, yeah.
I think,
sorry, go on.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say that at one level, the diversity strategy sounds obvious. But when you start putting it into paper, it becomes always a little bit more challenging. And it prompts many questions, because obviously the strategy is never that far away of the question of how you're going to deliver. So I think it's quite easy for us to say diversity strategy, but I think that opens up all sorts of challenges in the business that people will find when they start thinking about the subject.
Yeah, no, I agree. So strategy on its own is a very consulting word.
Yes, it is.
Throw in diversity. Oh, it's even more more consulting. The only thing it's missing is inclusive or inclusion. And then diversity and inclusion strategy. This is like a loaded sentence. I think at this point, I guess first point is understanding how diverse you are right now. And then if I was doing the strategy, it'd be 2 bullets is what profile do I want to land in? Like I want 50% diversity or whatever percentage. So a target and the timeline. I think those are only 2 things you need at this stage because things are still moving too much. But obviously, Isaac might have a completely different view than this. I think those are the key takeaways. So start collecting data, even if it's rubbish, and look at the pilot that's coming out in the autumn for ideas on what to collect. Having identified what diversity data you need to collect, then visit your customer profiles and see if you can fudge in some of those data attributes in the profiles and rerun those. And then third thing is really start thinking long-term, okay, where do we need to get to and how do we get there? And that journey is going to be a discovery of the tools you might need and the paths you might need to take in terms of succession plan, training development, and so on. We'd like to close with one final thought by looking at some of the data that the FCA is looking to collect. But before we look at any of this, and we're not going to go into the detail of the data, the only point I'd make is a lot of this data is being sourced from the HR teams. And what we saw with the risk management, creating a road for the CROs to the board, we feel that this diversity and inclusion could be a topic big enough that might create a road for HR directors to be on the board. Anything to add to that, Isaac?
No, I think the challenge is there for HR to be a partner in delivering all this. It's just the fact that there are so limited references to HR in the discussion paper. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
with
but that's naturally where it sits with HR. And if you are a go-getter HR director, then this could be your ticket to the board and really help the business make better decisions to diversity. Dramatic enough?
Very dramatic, but
perfect.
Enough.
If there's nothing else to add, we'll end this here.
I think we're done enough for today.
All right. With that, all the best reading this paper. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Waleed.